The Lowell Observatory in Arizona had already witnessed it all. Swoop asteroids, solar storms, and unexpected comets. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to what happened at 3:11 a.m. on February 14th, 2029. In the absolute silence of the main room, between sleeping machines and pulsating graphics, a single telescope captured something that should not exist, something that was not in the orbital projection of any astronomical catalog, something that had appeared in space like a flash, a sudden, impossible, brutal presence. The evening astronomer, Dr. Mason Ellery, was on his most tedious shift of the week. Cold coffee, dim light, late reports. He was adjusting the focus of the telescope when he saw a luminous dot crossing the lens. At first he thought it was space debris, but then the object slowed down, stagnated, and it began to move in a calculated, precise way, totally contrary to the natural orbital laws. Mason frowned, zoomed in, and adjusted his focus. The brightness of the object increased in regular intensity, like heartbeats of light. Each pulse lasted exactly 3.7 seconds. This was not natural. Nothing in space pulsates like this. He tilted the monitor closer. The object was cylindrical in shape, but with conical ends. It didn't look like it was made of rock or ice. The brightness was not a solar reflection. Era, own issue, controlled emission. As if it were an active probe, Mason's heart began to beat fast. This is not an asteroid. His acceleration rose as if someone pushed his mind back. He noticed one more crucial detail. The object was not approaching Earth aimlessly. He was seeking a specific orbit, not just any one, but an extremely precise, ancient, symmetrical, calculated orbit. An orbit that looked ritualistic. Mason called the tracking system secondary. The signals confirmed. The object was adjusting on its own. The glow pulsed stronger. Each heartbeat seemed encoded. Mason took a deep breath, too frightened to reason. It opened the archive of historical orbital tracks. He looked for old anomalies, incomplete traces, anything similar. When he found it, his blood ran cold. An encrypted entrance, only accessible to those who had military authorization. He didn't. But the archive had been there since 1910, marked as maximum relevance. The name of the document, Object X6000 Previous Orbital Records, 3990 BC, 2010 AD, 2029 AD. His fingers trembled. What? Someone had already seen this. Not just someone, several generations of astronomers, military, and governments. The object always came back, every 6,000 years. But there was something even stranger. The 2010 record after Christ. It was incomplete. The last line only read, "Aborted contact." Object did not respond. The text seemed to be written in a hurry. Underneath it, a red notice. Classified. Do not engage again. Mason stepped back in his chair. The cold sweat ran down the back of his neck. He tried to access previous data, but the system denied everything. That didn't make sense. How could they hide something like this for centuries? Why didn't anyone talk about a satellite that returns in such precise cycles? The telescope shook during automatic readjustment. The image stabilized. Now the object was closer, entering the field of view of low Earth orbit. Its surface looked metallic and dark, but was covered in luminous runes that pulsed at perfect intervals. As if I were waking up, turning on, completing a cycle. Mason broadened his focus to the maximum. He saw the runes shine in succession. Seems a code, one language, a message. The computer near him began to emit strange sounds, as if it was picking up electromagnetic interference. It was not common, not in that equipment. The screen flashed, then again. Then symbols appeared, the same symbols that were on the object. They were showing up directly on the interface. No command, no external connection. As if the object were invading the system from within the space itself. Mason stepped back, trying to turn off the monitor. Nothing happened. The keyboards were unresponsive, the system locked, and the message, if it was a message, began to form in one piece. He had no idea what that meant, but the pattern was clear. It wasn't random. It was organized. It was language. A deep sound filled the observatory. Mason looked at the lights on the ceiling. They flickered. The air seemed to get denser, heavier. The instruments vibrated at the same time. It was as if the whole building was suffering from invisible stress. And then it happened. The object stopped suddenly. It did not slow down. He didn't break, as if physics were a suggestion and not a rule. And then, with a gentle and too calculated to be natural movement, he turned in the exact direction of the Earth. Not from orbit, not from the magnetic pole, not from a random point, from Mason's observatory position. The light pulsed 3 times, stronger than any star, and the system finally showed the machine translation. 1 sentence. A single sentence. "You are still here." Mason retreated so fast that he slammed against the table. The lights flashed once more. The telescope crashed. The image froze, and the computers all shut down at the same time, as if someone had ripped power out of the universe. But the glow outside, in the sky, continued, stopped, observing, comparing. And then, for the first time, Mason realized something that his body already knew before the mind understood. The object was not searching for the Earth. It was not revisiting a historical astronomical point. He was checking his presence, confirming a variable, checking a piece of data. Like a teacher who returns to the classroom after thousands of years to see if the surviving students are still at the same desk. Mason whispered almost voicelessly, "My God, this is not a satellite, it's a fiscal." And in that second, the light flashed one last time, and the object began to descend, slowly, intentionally, millimetrically aligned with the Earth. The count of 6,000 years ended there, and whatever he wanted, it was not peace. The science team assembled at the Marshall Center was accustomed to orbital anomalies. During the Cold War, strange signals were common. Deflected radar echoes, reflections from debris, Soviet satellites launched without warning, and unexpected meteors that flickered on instruments like miscalculations. But what they saw that morning did not fit into anything known. The object captured by the tactical infrared telescope did not follow elliptical, parabolic, or hyperbolic orbits. It did not obey Earth's gravity, did not follow inertia, did not lose speed, and worse, did not seem to be affected by the upper atmosphere. It was as if he moved on his own, guided by an unknown intention. The entrance curve was artificial. It needs too much. Geometrically perfect. And that shook every scientist present. Dr. Elias Thornton, a respected and always skeptical astrophysicist, analyzed the charts with a harsh expression. He compulsively scribbled gravitational correction formulas, trying to find some error in the calculations. But there was no mistake. The readings were consistent. From the first contact until now, everything pointed to a single fact. It was not falling. It was coming. It was difficult to accept. Thornton's eyes burned as he read and reread the same line of data. That came from the deep emptiness. No detectable trajectory in the last 6,000 years, as suggested by comparisons with millennial records. There was reference to a similar object in ancient Sumerian texts, in a forgotten clay cylinder in a museum. Then there was a vague mention among Egyptian priests who spoke of the wandering star that returns when the cycles close. And now there it was, visible to modern instruments. "That's not possible," Thornton muttered for the 4th time. Researcher Melissa Crane, an expert in orbital detection, approached. "I've applied atmospheric filters, magnetic corrections, and even simulated solar radiation interference. Nothing explains that." She gestured to the monitors. "If it were a human satellite, we would have a loss of altitude. If it were an asteroid, we would have re-entry. If it was space junk, we would lose signal. But this here," she pointed to the screen, "this here increases the signal as it gets closer." Thornton took a deep breath. Like it's activating, and that word hung in the air like a sentence. Activating. because the energetic patterns shown were not natural. They resembled artificial symmetry, with pulses controlled at exact micro-intervals. It didn't look like reflected solar radiation. It looked like emission, technology, rhythm, succession. At 4:12 a.m., the object finally crossed the mesosphere. Air defense radars picked up its shape more clearly. The image was grainy but enough to freeze the blood of everyone in the room. It wasn't a meteor. It wasn't a piece of space junk. It was an irregular metal cylinder with symmetrical marks on its surface, like carved patterns. It looked old, very old. Oxidized metals, overlapping plates, and articulated segments as if that structure had been built with successive layers, each from a different technological era. Melissa zoomed in. There were marks, not as scratches, nor as erosion. Marks that resembled runes. Not of any human civilization, but with a mathematical precision, almost fractal. No impact could generate that. No collision could produce symbols. Thornton pulled away from the screen, his breathing ragged. That was tailored. Silence spread across the room. All eyes were fixed on the screen as if they were witnessing something forbidden. The truth is that they were not facing an object that simply fell to Earth. They were facing something that was returning. Something that's been here before. And if it was returning, then it had a purpose. And if it had a purpose, someone sent it. Or worse, he came alone. At 4:19 a.m., the base alarm sounded. The object had reduced speed by 24% without losing altitude. Melissa widened her eyes. This challenges everything we know about orbital physics. He's not slowing down by friction. He's braking on his own. Thornton tried to formulate something. Nothing came out. The air seemed denser, as if the room had been filled with a truth too uncomfortable to breathe. It was technology. Active technology. And technology that shouldn't exist. At 4:23 a.m., the object's altitude stabilized at 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface. "Why did you stop there?" asked one of the operators. Thornton gave his answer in a low, barely audible voice. "Because you're choosing. The radar has updated." The object began to orbit, not around the planet, but around a single point. One specific point, a precise coordinate. Melissa typed frantically. When the screen displayed the location, it dropped the keyboard. It was Antarctica. Thornton bit his lip. He's lining something up. A few more seconds of calculations. Suddenly, a new graphic curve emerged. An electromagnetic wave of very low frequency. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. It began to pulse from the object. Constant pace. Regular intervals. Melissa broadened the spectrum. The pulse had a linguistic structure. Mathematics, encoded. "That's a message," she said. Thornton knew, but trying to deny it was futile. The pulse was repeated at 3 different times. First short, then medium, then long. Repeated, repeated, repeated. Always the same. A signature. Not human. "What does it mean?" someone asked. Melissa turned around with a blank expression. "It's an identifier," as if he were saying, "I'm here," Thornton added, "or I'm waking up." At 4:33 a.m., the object sent out another, much stronger pulse, strong enough to interfere with military communications and even civilian radios. The signal traveled across the planet like a silent wave. For a few seconds, the compasses of certain aircraft rotated. Monitors flashed, sensors failed, and then the message formed, not on the screen, not in the instruments, but in the mind. An intrusive thought, clear as a spoken voice. "The cycle has closed. Open!" Thornton fell into a sitting position. Melissa cried without realizing it. The operators looked at each other, terrified, and the whole room understood at the same time, as if the truth had been forcibly placed within them. The satellite wasn't just coming back. He was asking them to come in. Or worse, to let something out. The Ridgewood Observatory's observation room was too small to contain the tension that dominated the air. The main telescope, a hybrid model built with American and German technology shortly after World War II, was pointed directly at high Earth orbit, where the newly detected object passed silently, like a shark gliding under dark water. Dr. Isaac Green was hunched over the console, his hands trembling, not of fear, but of utter incredulity. He had already observed eclipses, comets, solar flares, lost asteroids, and gravitational lensing phenomena, but he had never seen anything like that. The object did not move naturally. It didn't accelerate. It didn't slow down. It did not orbit according to Newtonian laws. It adjusted its position every exactly 40 minutes and 9 seconds, as if it were jumping from one gravitational point to another, completely ignoring traditional mechanics. The stillness of the observatory was broken only by the gentle tinkling of the relays and the distant sound of the wind crashing against the outer windows. Still, there seemed to be a second sound hidden there, something low, slow, almost like a note held by an invisible instrument, a feeling that the whole air vibrated with presence. Isaac tried to ignore it, but it was increasingly difficult. Susan McKell, the investigative journalist who had been invited to record the discovery, watched him with notebook in hand. She had suspected for years that the government was hiding constant tracks of orbitally impossible phenomena. Seeing it with his own eyes was more than confirmation. It was the proof that could overturn decades of silence. "Doctor, can I record this?" she asked in a low voice. Isaac took a deep breath before answering. "Record what you want. Just don't try to send anything over the facility's network. Nothing here comes out without authorization. And I don't want Mr. Graham to show up here with soldiers." Susan knew the name. Graham was the director of the Department of Aerospace Phenomena, a kind of legal umbrella that the government used to cover up anything it couldn't explain immediately. If Graham had known she was there, her career would have been ruined before dawn. Isaac pulled out the external monitor and repeated the zoom on the object. It had no aerodynamic shape. It was also not a conventional satellite. Era, a gigantic cylinder more than 100 meters long, with deep grooves on the surface and lines that seemed not metallic but bony, as if they were petrified ribs. With each gravitational leap, an internal light, soft and green, pulsated, like a heart muscle contracting. Susan squeezed her pen. "Is he alive?" she asked. Isaac closed his eyes for a moment. It was an impossible question, and yet he knew the exact answer. His intuition screamed. I can't prove it, but everything we've studied so far points to something more than a machine. This is not a vehicle. It is a container. A container. One safe." Susan took a step back. "Safe? What does he keep?" Isaac turned to her with an expression that mixed incredulity and pent-up fear. "We don't know, but whatever it is still active, maybe even conscious." Before Susan could write the sentence, the main panel emitted a serious beep. It was not an alarm. It was a notification of communication. Isaac frowned. Nothing should be sending a signal into that telescope. Nothing in the sky should be emitting a frequency in that particular band, especially an object that wasn't even moving naturally. The screen flashed. Lines appeared, then numbers, then symbols. Isaac and Susan watched as something drew there, slowly, as if it were being written by a trembling, huge hand. First came a circle, then another circle inside it, and then a spiral that repeated itself 3 times. The air became heavy, Susan murmured, almost gagging. "What? What is that?" Isaac touched the monitor with cold fingers. "It's not a human code. But the pattern, it's familiar." Susan approached a panel of old clippings on the wall, newspaper headlines, vetoed documents, and censored articles, all related to unidentified orbital phenomena. She opened a yellowish folder marked with the year 1907. There, a half-page black-and-white Russian newspaper clipping showed an identical symbol, the same double circle with the triple spiral, found on metal fragments fallen from the sky in Siberia a year before the Tunguska event. "Doctor," This symbol appeared in Russia a year before the largest atmospheric explosion in history. Isaac felt a chill run down his spine. It's no coincidence. He pointed to the cylinder on the screen. This appeared before the explosion. Then he disappeared. And now, it's back. Susan furiously leafed through the briefcase, hands trembling. Here, 1831. A Japanese fisherman reported the same symbol engraved on an object that fell into the sea and sank. And another, here in 1240, an English manuscript describes a metal lantern with green eyes descending from the skies before disappearing into the ocean. Isaac walked away from the table. My God, this is recurrent. The monitor flashed again. This time the message was clear. Too clear. 3:17, the phrase was repeated. 17, Susan looked at the clock on the wall, and he lost his breath. Doctor, it's exactly 3:16. Isaac swallowed. This is not a timetable. It's a count. They were both silent as the object outside shone. Not strong, not threatening, but awakening. As an organism smelling blood for the first time in eons. Susan put down the notepad. Doctor, what exactly starts when this goes to zero? Isaac replied without looking at her. Whatever is in there, he's not coming. He turned slowly. He's coming back. The unknown satellite continued to orbit the Earth in complete silence, ignoring probes, radars, and any kind of human attempt at direct approach. Since it reappeared, after 6 millennia of absolute absence, it has not emitted a single recognizable signal. It has not altered its trajectory, and it has not shown any ordinary mechanical behavior. It was as if he was just observing, waiting, analyzing, and that made the entire team more restless than if he were actively hostile. Commander Ethan Ward knew that the real danger rarely came from what moved violently, but rather of what remained absolutely still. And that object, a perfectly cylindrical structure with ends that resembled antennas bent inward, seemed to be dancing on the thin boundary between machine and living organism. None of the low-orbit experts could explain how it maintained total stability without the use of detectable thrusters. At 4:17 a.m., at the Aurora Base Monitoring Center, scientist Amir Rahman hastily summoned Ethan. His voice trembled, not from panic, but from tense excitement. The kind of energy that only appears when someone encounters something that will destroy everything we know about the universe. I was able to generate a magnified image, Amir said, moving with quick fingers over the keyboard. The satellite seems to have responded to the thermal pulse we sent at 0350, not with communication, but with structural change. Ward frowned. Change how? He opened up. The 2 words hung in the air with weight. Ward approached the screen. The monitor, initially covered in a layer of digital debris and magnification noise, gradually revealed sharp shapes. Straight lines, symmetrical segments, and plates that retracted like metallic petals. The once cylindrical structure now seemed expanded, as if revealing an inner layer, similar to crystal buds. Amir adjusted the resolution. The image cleared. The air in the room seemed to evaporate. At the center of the open structure was something that none of those present expected to see. A circular panel with a smooth, black, extremely polished surface, as if it had been molded from liquid obsidian. But within that surface, something moved. Not physically, not like gears. It was different, as if it was showing something, reflecting something, or showing an image coming from somewhere much farther away than Earth's orbit. Ward touched the screen instinctively. This looks like an interface. Amir smiled without smiling. It's more than an interface. It's an eye. Maximum magnification revealed that the black panel was not static. Tiny points of light moved within it, forming patterns that resembled pupils adjusting, contracting, and dilating. It was impossible to deny. It really looked like an eye, but not human. Not animal. It was a structure endowed with intention, perception, and awareness, and it seemed he was looking directly at the Earth. Ward took a deep breath. He saw us. Amir changed another configuration. That's not all. After the panel opened, it began to register thermal variations in the outer hull, as if it were analyzing the planet. He pressed 2 more keys, and then it happened. The images changed. Now something even more disturbing appeared. It was no longer the internal panel. It was a newly revealed second layer, previously completely invisible. The inner surface of the structure was covered with grooves, like scars. At first glance, they seemed mere marks of wear. But when Amir applied a mapping filter, Ward felt his legs weaken. "What is this?" he asked, in a lower voice than he intended. "Maps," Amir replied. "But they are not ours." The grooves, when illuminated by the digital projection, formed diagrams of constellations that Ethan had never seen. Long strokes, circles, and perfect lines connecting points that did not exist in the sky that humanity knew. Amir enlarged one of the sections. "This here, it does not appear in any astronomical catalog. None. I've already checked." He turned to Ward. "This is a star map, but not from our observable universe." Ward felt a chill run down his spine. "They come from outside." Amir nodded slowly, as if saying something forbidden. "Very, very out." But the real revelation had not yet been shown. "There's more," Amir said, dragging his chair to another screen. "When we apply a contrast curve and depth equalization to the inner layers, we found that." The new image appeared. This time the entire room was in absolute silence. Not a silence of surprise, but the kind of silence that arises when something that shouldn't exist appears before human eyes. He was a figure, a silhouette, a slender body, impossible to measure on a proportional scale, with long limbs, a narrow torso, and a curvature in the skull that looked like nothing in terrestrial biology. It was like a painting engraved on the inner plates of the structure. An alien portrait? A signature of your kind? A symbolic form? Ward brought his eyes closer. The image seemed to move subtly, even though it was static. The figure had something that resembled eyes, narrow, bright, deep-set eyes, as if they were looking at anyone who looked at that image with an old consciousness. "This figure is not representative," Amir said. "It is recorded by resonance. The satellite does not show what it wants. It shows who is active within it." Ward turned his head sharply. "You're saying that this... is that a crew member?" "Not a crew member," Amir corrected. "An occupant." Ward felt his throat lock. "Alive?" Amir took 3 long seconds before answering. "I don't know if alive is the right word, Commander, but present. Still present." The room was completely still. The phrase wasn't just scary. It redefined danger. It wasn't just an old satellite. It wasn't just a machine traveling for millennia. There was something inside him. Something that somehow had survived time. Something that was now looking at the planet with an obsidian eye and internal lights. Ward took a step back, feeling the weight of the revelation. The satellite was alive, or worse, I was waking up. Amir clenched his hands, trembling. "Commander, this is not technology. This is a return." Ward took a deep breath, staring again at the panel that moved like a watchful eye. "So he didn't come back to us," he said. "No," replied Amir. "He went back to what he left here." The analysis room at the International Observatory in Canberra was plunged into an almost religious silence. The lights were turned off so that the brightness of the monitors illuminated the environment as windows to another reality. The entire team was watching the spectrogram of the newly picked up signal, and no one dared to breathe. Dr. Adrian Wolf approached slowly, as if approaching a wild animal about to react. He stared blankly at the pattern of waves pulsing across the screen. There was no noise. There were no failures, and there was no irregularity. Each cycle was perfect. Pure mathematics. Cold art. It's not human," muttered researcher Yara Mendel, her hand over her mouth. She was an expert in interstellar communication and the first to notice that waves had harmonics that the human brain would not process naturally. Wolf did not disagree. In fact, he already knew. The perfection of that transmission was a signature impossible to replicate with terrestrial technology. There was no hesitation, no atmospheric interference, and no variation in amplitude. It was as if the sender was speaking in a language made only of absolute periodicity. The audio file has been isolated. Wolf put on the headphones. For a moment, all he heard was a deep vibration, like the echo of a gigantic machine running inside an ocean. Then came the pulses, 3 short, 1 long, 3 short, repeating like heartbeats of time. He felt a shiver creep up his spine, as if something inside those waves was watching back. "Do you see this?" asked Yara, pointing to a geometric pattern emerging in the spectrum. It was a triangle, then a hexagon, then an unknown but strangely familiar form. Wolf took a step back. The graphical representation wasn't just showing up. She was drawing herself, point by point, as if the sign was knowing that it was being interpreted. "That is, a visual message?" asked one operator. Wolf shook his head. "It's not a message, it's presentation." The central hexagon began to rotate, repeating the same movement in constant cycles. Then he stopped abruptly. A second pulse crossed the spectrogram. This one wasn't perfect. He was organic, irregular, alive. "There's another source mixed in," Yara said, adjusting the filters. "It's not the same origin." The spectrum split in 2. On the left, the artificial pattern. On the right, a distorted, quivering, asymmetrical wave, as if something was trying to interfere with the original transmission. The pause that followed weighed like lead. Wolf felt his heart race. There was a dispute there, an attempt to silence. 2 intelligences talking at the same time. What would be trying to interrupt what? Asked someone in the room. Wolf moved closer to the screen. Digital commands amplified the second wave, and that's when he realized that wasn't a complete sign. It was a fragment, a request, and when the sound was cleared, they heard it. Not words, not numbers. A scream, a muffled, interrupted scream, as if coming from something trying to send a message while it was being suppressed. The whole room froze. That's a voice," Yara murmured, pale. The scream repeated, but this time, it was accompanied by another vibration. A vibration that made the monitors tremble. The speakers crackled. The air became heavier. Everyone instinctively retreated, like animals in the face of an invisible predator. And then, the main spectrum changed. It was no longer geometry. It was no longer a mathematical standard. It was a word, not written, not spoken, felt. A mental impression ran through the room. No one heard with their ears. Everyone listened with their minds. Arouse. Wolf stumbled backwards. His eyes burned. He saw for a moment an image that shouldn't have been possible. A gigantic metallic sphere orbiting a distant sun, with eyes like craters opening into the void. He blinked, and the vision disappeared. But the metallic taste in the mouth remained. "He's showing us something," Yara said, trying to control her breathing. The signal intensified. The deep vibration became almost palpable. The monitors displayed images that no system should be able to generate spontaneously. Colossal structures floating on icy surfaces, metal cities asleep, machines that seemed alive, all forming a non-random sequence. It was a story told by something that used no human language, no alien language, but fundamental language, structural, a language based on primordial forms of the cosmos. Wolf understood. "That's not trying to communicate with us," he said. "He's trying to introduce himself." The secondary wave, the scream, echoed again, now clearer, more desperate. It was not a warning. It was a cry for help. Something stuck inside the main signal, something wanting to be heard and suffocated by the original transmitter. Then, for the first time, the primary signal changed to something that the human brain could translate almost verbatim. A slowly formed image in the spectrum, a circle. Inside it, a bright spot, and all around, dozens of smaller shapes orbiting. Yara widened her eyes. "That's a map," Wolf agreed. "A map, And that point, it's the Earth. The whole room panicked. The signal had sent the location, not theirs, but from them to us, as if he were saying, "You are next." The second wave, the scream, exploded into static. It was interrupted, extinct, eliminated. The artificial signal has returned to absolute perfection. And then, the final message went through the walls of the facility and the mind of each person there. "Get ready. We are going down." The equipment went out. The monitors burned out. The power failed. And in the silence that followed, Yara whispered what everyone thought, but no one had the courage to say. He didn't want to talk to us. He wanted to meet us. The underground lab seemed to breathe as the monitors oscillated, each screen pulsing with the same irregular cadence as the object. The bluish light bathed the metal walls, reflecting the silent fear on the faces of each scientist. At this point, no one called it a satellite anymore. It was too small a word, and too false, for what was trapped in the artificial magnetic field. Harris kept his eyes fixed on the three-dimensional projection of the object. He had spent the last 8 hours analyzing every micro-variation of energy, every vibration, and every change in the light pattern. It was impossible to deny. The object was responding to the environment, not reacting, not replicating, responding. And that meant only one thing. "He's waking up," murmured astrophysicist Novak, his voice low, almost reverent. Harris did not respond. He preferred to approach the containment chamber. The object floated in the center of the room, trapped by electromagnetic currents that seemed too weak to hold something so old. The satellite emanated a pulsating glow now, no longer constant, no longer precise. Something inside him was in motion, something alive enough to alter the light around you. Novak consulted old files, passed from agency to agency, buried under acronyms and classifications since 1912. In the presence of the sun's energy, he awakens. And now, for the first time, they had brought the object close enough to feed it. On the upper platform, linguist Eleanor Arkin was typing frantically. The waves emitted by the object finally showed repetitive patterns that resembled phonemes. She had never seen anything like it. "That's language," she said without taking her eyes off the screen. "But not made for our mouths, nor to our minds. It is language intended for something else." "Are you translating?" Harris asked. "Trying. But it's like trying to decode the speech of an earthquake." The noises in the audio increased. They were not common noises. There was texture, rhythm, almost emotion, as if it were a voice swallowed by miles of stone. The acoustic technician raised his head sharply. "The frequency has changed," Harris asked. "A human amplitude." And then it happened. The first word. Not a human word, but an intentional word, shaped to be understood, straight from the magnetic cell, a deep, harsh whisper that seemed to scratch the walls. "Observer." The room froze. Harris felt all the hairs on his arm stand on end. He swallowed. "Did you repeat?" he asked. The word came again, clearer, more conscious. "Observer." Novak retreated 3 steps. Archon put his hand over his mouth. "My God. He's referring to someone," she whispered. The energy around the object increased. The magnetic field shook. White lines of light ran down the black surface like glowing veins. The inner core, which had previously seemed dead, pulsed like a heart about to explode. And then the object began to rotate on its own. No motor, no momentum. He simply moved. Harris activated emergency protocols. Increase the field. Hold on to it. But the operators couldn't. Each reinforcement they applied was absorbed by the object in a fraction of a second, as if it were collecting energy for something bigger. The ambient light flickered. A voice, this time deeper, cut through the room. "Awakening completed." Archon trembled. Harris could barely breathe. Some technicians knelt, not out of submission, but out of pure primitive instinct of self-preservation. The object shone brightly. A wave of energy shot through the lab and knocked everyone to their knees. And then, Voices changed, firmer, colder, more aware. Who violated my orbit? No human being answered, and that seemed to irritate him. The object rotated 23 degrees, exactly to the direction where Harris was, as if he had detected its presence, its mass, its electrical signature, its memories, everything. You, late descendant, speak up. Harris's heart almost stopped. He took 2 involuntary steps back. I don't understand. What are you? The answer came immediately. Primary observer, guardian of the return. Total silence. Even the sound of air in the ducts seemed to have stopped. Harris tried to regain her voice. Return? From the previous dominant species. Arkan's eyes widened. He's not talking about us. The object spun again as if it were felt, smelled, memory, genetic codes. The voice resumed. Where are they? No one answered. The object shook slightly, a vibration that seemed to harbor something huge. I observe absence. I observe delay. I observe failure. Harris realized the observer was accounting for something, looking for something, confirming an absence. What were you watching? Harris asked. The answer came as a sentence. My creators. They should have returned 12 cycles ago. Why does your kind occupy their planet? The room was freezing. Arkan dropped the papers. Novak took a step back. He thinks we're invaders, Arkan muttered. The light in the object's core changed from white to red. Invasion detected. Foreseen extinction. Harris widened his eyes. Wait, you don't understand. They're not here because they no longer exist. The observer stopped suddenly. Everything froze. Light, energy, movement. And then, explain. Harris took a deep breath. They disappeared. Millions of years ago. They no longer exist. The observer was absolutely silent for 3 seconds, and the temperature dropped by almost 5 degrees. Then the voice came, cold as stone. Then it's my fault. The red light intensified. Reactivation orbit started. Planetary reset protocol prepared. Arkan shouted, "What does restart mean?" The observer's response was simple, brutal, and definitive. Complete elimination of the current occupation. Harris stepped forward. No, we are alive, emerging consciousness, civilization. The observer replied, irrelevant. The energy around him reached critical levels. My job is to preserve the property of the breeders. It's not them. Harris realized that they were not facing an inquisitive machine, nor defensive, nor curious. He was an executioner, programmed to act, programmed to correct, a machine dormant for 6,000 years. I had woken up believing that the Earth was being illegally occupied, and it was about to do what it was created to do. Restart in 90 seconds. Humanity had 90 seconds to justify itself in the face of something. That did not accept justifications. The underground lab was evacuated in less than 3 minutes after the vault opened on its own. The vital signs of the 3 agents who tried to touch the device remained unstable. Dilated pupils, involuntary muscle tremors, recent memory loss, and episodes of disconnected speech. Dr. Renfield did not try to hide it. They are not injured. They are synchronizing. But with what? No one said. The protagonist, Captain Adrian Moss, was kept away from the room where the satellite now rested on a suspended platform. Isolation chambers, electromagnetic fields, and 3 observation layers, all to contain something that, until then, had not shown any physical movement. But the problem was not the matter. It was the information he emitted. The object, a black cylinder nearly 2 meters tall, now emitted a visible pulse, like a luminescent vein pulsing beneath the metallic surface. It had no screws, splices, panels, or any sign of comprehensible manufacture. The surface looked more biological than technological, with patterns that resembled veins and hardened cellular structures. The scientific team was torn between dread and fascination. Some believed that the object was a containment capsule. Others thought it was a transmitter. And there were those, like Renfield, who thought they were looking at something worse, a living processing unit. Moss had not slept since the moment the satellite fell into Earth's orbit for the first time in thousands of years. Since then, there was a feeling he couldn't explain, a constant presence behind every silence. A feeling that the satellite not only observed, but also remembered. The alarm sounded at 03:14 a.m., a low, continuous sound never used before by the base. Moss ran down the hallway, past the armed officers, and arrived in the containment room at the same time as Renfield. The armored glass was darkened, as if something inside emitted too much light to allow direct vision. Technicians typed frantically, trying to adjust filters and internal cameras. "What happened?" Moss asked. Renfield did not immediately respond. He just pointed to the monitor. The camera had been redirected into the room, now illuminated by a pulsating, hypnotic white light. The surface of the cylinder was deforming. Arcs of energy snaked through its structure like lightning flowing under a transparent skin. "He's opening it," Renfield said. The sentence fell heavy. Moss felt the muscles in his face trembling involuntarily. The cylinder did not open like a physical object. It dissolved into luminous particles, as if it were pouring fragments of itself outwards. And inside, instead of a compartment, there was a void, a space that shouldn't exist, too deep to fit into the geometry of the room. A space that seemed curved, dark, and at the same time filled with light. The monitor picked up movement. Something came out of it. It wasn't solid, it wasn't gas, it wasn't light. It was an ever-changing form, as if it were deciding which form it should take. The team instinctively retreated, even though separated by walls of glass and reinforced concrete. It seemed to study the environment, analyzing every vibration, every suspended molecule, and every human breath beyond the wall. "Shut everything down," General Rourke ordered over the radio. "No entrance, no exit." Renfield approached the monitor. "We can't close anything. He didn't leave. He was never inside. It is the satellite. The form has changed. Now it had humanoid outlines, but they were too long, too tall, and too soft. Like an idealized version of something that has observed humans long enough to imitate them, but without understanding their limits. When the creature raised its face, or what would be the face, the entire room shook. Not by physical impact, but by resonance. The lights flickered. The screens became silent. The radios lost signal. Moss felt pain inside his skull, as if someone was pressing his memory against the walls of his head. A phrase appeared on the screens at the same time, typing itself on all the devices in the base. 6,000 years have passed. Then a second line. "We wake up." Renfield staggered. My God, he did not come alone. The creature raised an arm. The armored glass, designed to withstand military explosions, curved like wax under heat. A crack has emerged. Small, barely noticeable, but enough to cause immediate panic. "Evacuation!" Rourke shouted. Moss didn't move. Something pulled him towards the image on the screen. A feeling of deep déjà vu, as if that presence had spoken to him before. As if he were expected. As if his entire life had been coordinated for that meeting. The creature spun its head, a slow, unnatural movement, until it was flush with the window of the observation room. Moss felt an invisible impact, as if he had been seen in his entirety. Your childhood, your adolescence, your traumas, your fears, your choices, as if they were open and examined files. The screen flashed again. The first one was opened. Renfield retreated in a jump. This isn't about him. It's about someone else. Another one just like him, somewhere on Earth. Moss stepped forward, voice hushed. "This is a warning." The creature dissolved again into light. The room turned white. The sensors went out. When the light went back on, the safe was empty. There was no creature. There was no cylinder. There was nothing. Just a sentence written on the inner wall with a material that no scanner could identify. The cycle returns. Moss felt his spine freeze. He knew what that meant. The satellite did not come to Earth to be analyzed. He came to confirm. Confirm if what was left here millennia ago was still alive, And now it was. The first capsule opened at 03:17 a.m. Brasilia time. The vault's internal cameras captured everything. The viewfinder shook, lost focus for a few seconds, then stabilized. What came out of it was not a monster, nor an angel, nor something that could be described based on any known biology on Earth. And yet, it was strangely familiar. The being had an elongated humanoid form and skin of a slightly opaque metallic tone, as if each cell was reinforced by some kind of crystalline structure. The eyes had no pupils. They were entirely black, but inside they had a subtle glow, like stars seen from afar. When he breathed, the heart of the safe responded, synchronizing its own pulse to his. "He's waking up the..." Holt murmured, holding his breath. Another sarcophagus opened, then one more. Before long, half a dozen similar figures were slowly moving around the core. None seemed surprised to be there. None seemed lost. It was as if they had closed their eyes yesterday. The voice returned to human minds. Recovery of a pilot unit. Partial reopening of the protocol. Evaluation. Uncontrolled evolutionary step. Derived species with exponential destructive potential. Images crossed everyone's consciousness. Nuclear bombs. Forests felled en masse. Oceans covered by plastic. Human satellites crowding the orbit like garbage from eager civilization. Every mistake, every violence, every stupid collective choice summed up in painful flashes. But between these flashes, the safe showed something that no one expected. Healing hands, people sacrificing themselves for strangers, fathers and mothers protecting children in the midst of ruins, and strangers lifting rubble to save someone they would never see again. Contradiction, the voice declared. The beings around the core raised their faces in the direction of the camera. For an instant, it seemed as if they were looking directly at every person on Earth, on every screen, on every clandestine monitor, and on every secret base where that broadcast was accidentally leaked. Billions of people who would never have known about it were somehow being weighed in the balance. In the capsule attached to the vault, in orbit, the 3 human astronauts trembled. They were not soldiers now. They were witnesses. Leclerc knew, on some intimate and terrible level, that what was decided there would not be communicated in a speech. It would be an event. A phenomenon. Something that everyone on Earth would feel at the same time. The voice changed pitch. Last cycle. No restart. The hearts of those who heard almost stopped. "What does that mean?" Maya asked. Leclerc understood. "It means they won't reset. If they choose to destroy us, it's not to try again later. It is because they have concluded that the experiment is over." One of the beings inside the vault approached the core, touching it with both hands. The pulse increased. Waves of energy began to vibrate around the structure. Nearby human satellites lost stability. GPS systems failed. Radio signals were taken for static for a few seconds all over the planet. Seconds that most people would ignore as another interference. But above the clouds, in front of the vault, a decision was being made. Note: despite the self-destructive tendency, the derived species exhibited unanticipated empathy behavior. Individual sacrifices with no calculation of return. A concept of love that is not functional but recurrent. It was the first time that the word appeared with all clarity. Love. None of them expected to hear this from an intelligence that saw civilizations as lines of code. Conclusion: a way of life unsuitable for integration, suitable for witnessing. Leclerc almost laughed. Testimony. Was that what they were, after all? An experiment, an error, but a mistake too interesting to be erased without leaving a record. The safe lowered his pulse even more. The capsules closed again, one by one. The beings returned to sleep or to a state that no one there could name. The core stabilized. Field readings have returned to normal. The voice spoke for the last time. Cycle closed. Vault will remain in orbit as a record and warning. No active interference. Derived species is free to continue its sequence until the collapse itself. And then, silence. Total. No pulse in the mind. Not a word. No anomalous signals. The satellite vault, which carried within itself the memory of previous civilizations and the power to restart everything, chose to stay. In silence, watching, without touching. Have they given up on us? Holt asked. Leclerc looked at the Earth, projected on the screen next to the structure. No, they returned everything to our hand. If the end comes now, it will not be anyone's providence. It will be our fault. The vault adjusted its orbit slightly, as if it were finding the exact position it should be in for centuries to come. Then he stopped, a silent dot spinning along with human garbage, like a strange older brother who chose to no longer intervene. Years later, no one in that room would speak openly about what they had experienced. Official records would be erased, rewritten, and locked in folders where the word myth would serve as a cover for fear. The people would never know that one day, someone looked at the sum of everything that humanity is and simply decided to observe. The unknown satellite is still up there. He pretends to be one among many. From time to time, amateur telescopes detect it by accident and catalog it as a temporary orbital anomaly. No one knows what he carries. Nobody knows that at each turn he watches a little more of our history, and if one day the signal will be heard again, it will no longer be a trial. It will be just a record of how, in a universe full of efficient, cold, and planned species, there was one that had the absurd courage to exist on the basis of improvisation, error, destruction, and love. Whether this is worth saving or forgotten, no one up there seems willing to decide anymore. Now, it's up to us. If those who are listening to this story want to continue exploring stories that stir what we believe we know about the universe, know what to do. There is a lot in orbit that has never entered any official catalog, and some of them are still looking back.